need to start this off with a bold claim, and I don't say this lightly, but hear me out. Iron Man and Doctor Doom have been connected from the very beginning of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I'm not talking about a passing Easter egg or a throwaway comic book nod that only hardcore fans would catch. I mean real narrative DNA, hidden threads, and deliberate parallels that Marvel has been sprinkling since Iron Man 1 all the way to Endgame. And if you think this sounds too far-fetched, I promise, by the time we get to the end of this breakdown, you'll see the MCU in a completely different way. Because the hints are insane, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. When Marvel Studios released Iron Man in 2008, they weren't just introducing Tony Stark. They were setting a template for what it means to be a genius, billionaire, futurist, and flawed hero all rolled into one. But here's the thing. In the comics, there's only one character who mirrors Tony Stark almost perfectly, and that's Victor Von Doom. Doom is like Stark's dark reflection, just as brilliant, just as technologically advanced, just as arrogant in his own way. But where Stark learns humility and sacrifice, Doom leans into control and dominance. And when I rewatched the MCU with this lens, suddenly I noticed patterns. It's almost like Marvel has been preparing the stage for Doom, not as a brand new villain, but as the inevitable shadow of Stark's legacy. Now let me lay this out in a storytelling way, because the way Marvel plants seeds is never random. In Iron Man 1, we meet Tony Stark at his absolute lowest and highest at the same time. He's this billionaire playboy arms dealer, but he's also held captive in a cave, forced to confront his own mortality. The arc reactor is born in desperation, built out of scraps, and it becomes both his salvation and his curse. And what is Doctor Doom's origin, if not a distorted echo of that? Doom is also someone who fuses technology and mysticism in a desperate attempt to control his fate, particularly to protect his mother's soul and conquer death itself. If Tony's story is technology saving him in a cave, Doom's story is technology damning him in his own hubris. They're two sides of the same coin, and Marvel knew exactly what they were doing when they made Stark's origin the foundation of the MCU. Here's where it gets really wild. Do you remember the 10 Rings? That shadowy organization that captured Tony in the cave? Everyone got hyped about them later connecting to the Mandarin and Shang-Chi, but what if their role wasn't just about the rings themselves? What if Marvel introduced them as a broader symbol of hidden power structures influencing the world? Doom, in the comics, often operates through proxies, secret groups, political influence. The 10 Rings and later Hydra both feel like precursors to something bigger, the idea that unseen forces have always been guiding events. And let's be honest, if any character in Marvel fits that description, it's Doom. Now, one of the most overlooked connections comes from Tony's obsession with control. Think about it. Tony never truly trusts anyone else to hold the line. In Avengers, he creates Ultron as a suit of armor around the world. In Civil War, he's the one arguing for oversight because he doesn't trust unregulated power. Even in Endgame, he can't help but build, solve, and control. That mindset is noble in intent, but it's also dangerously close to Doom's philosophy. Doom believes the world would be better under his rule because only he has the intellect to prevent chaos. If you strip away the heroic intent, Tony Stark's worldview overlaps with Doom's almost perfectly. That's not an accident. That's Marvel planting character parallels that they can later exploit. And here's another thread that floored me when I connected it. Stark's armor progression. Every new suit Tony builds reflects not just a technological upgrade, but an evolution of ideology. By the time we get to Endgame, his nanotech suit is practically magic. It heals itself, reshapes instantly, and creates weapons that defy physics. That blurred line between technology and the mystical is exactly what defines Doom. Doom isn't just a man of science, he's a man of sorcery. He embodies the fusion of both. So in a way, Tony Stark's evolution was leading us straight into Doom's territory. The MCU trained us to accept armor that looks like wizardry. That's the bridge to a character like Doom being believable on screen. But let's circle back to Iron Man 1 again, because there's a detail in that movie that people don't talk about enough. When Tony comes back from captivity and builds his first public suit, Obadiah Stane steals the arc reactor technology. He creates his own massive armored suit, the Ironmonger. That's Marvel showing us a template. Stark's ideas will always be stolen, corrupted, and weaponized by others. Now, who in the comics is the ultimate thief of ideas? Doom. Doom constantly looks at Reed Richards, Tony Stark, anyone who thinks they're the smartest, and says, "I can do it better." Stane was just the beginning. It's almost prophetic that from the very first Iron Man movie, Stark's technology being used by others was a core theme. If you apply that same logic forward, who's the ultimate inheritor of Stark's innovations now that Tony is gone? Doom. Think about how poetic that would be. Tony Stark dies saving the universe. His sacrifice is absolute. But in his absence, the world doesn't just lose Iron Man. It inherits his legacy, his tech, and his unfinished ideas. And if Doom is the one who steps into that vacuum, then Tony's shadow looms over every future story. It makes Doom not just another villain, but a continuation of Stark's story in a twisted way. And I think Marvel has been dropping subtle hints about this inevitability all along. One of the strongest hints actually comes from Endgame itself. Remember the time travel sequences? When Tony meets Howard Stark in 1970, we see this generational reflection. A father who's building weapons, and a son who's trying to move past them. But Doom's story is also one of legacy, of parents, of trying to rewrite fate. In the comics, Doom is haunted by his mother's death, and everything he builds is a reaction to that pain. So when Tony has that quiet moment with his father, it's more than just closure. It's a reminder that every genius is shaped by family, by loss, by unresolved pain. That's Doom's origin in a nutshell. It's like Endgame was priming us to think about genius and grief, not just in Stark's terms, but in a broader archetype that Doom perfectly fits into. And here's where new speculation kicks in. Marvel has been very intentional about the Fantastic Four reboot. They've confirmed Doom isn't the immediate villain, which is already suspicious. Because Doom isn't the kind of character you just toss in as a disposable antagonist. He's the kind of character you build toward. And what better way to build him than to tether his rise directly to the fall of Iron Man? Imagine how much heavier it hits if Doom emerges not as some random Latverian dictator, but as someone who has studied Stark's technology, exploited his absence, and positioned himself as the next great futurist. That's how you make him feel inevitable. Let's also not forget that in Spider-Man, Far From Home, we get our first taste of what a Starkless world looks like. The entire movie is basically about the fallout of Tony's death. Mysterio exploits Stark tech to create illusions. Peter struggles with the idea of inheriting Tony's legacy. And that theme, who inherits Stark's mantle, is not just Peter's problem. It's the MCU's central question. Marvel made us care so deeply about Tony Stark that now every major character and villain has to answer the question, what do we do without him? Doom is the perfect answer to that question. He's not just inheriting the mantle, he's corrupting it. And the craziest part? Marvel already tested this story in the comics. There's literally an arc where Dr. Doom becomes Iron Man. After Tony goes into a coma post-Civil War II, Doom dons the armor and tries to redeem himself. He calls himself the infamous Iron Man. Now, whether you loved or hated that comic run, the fact remains, Marvel already linked these characters narratively. They showed us that Doom sees himself as Stark's equal, maybe even his better, and he's willing to step into that role. So if Marvel has already planted those seeds in print, why wouldn't they adapt a version of it on screen? Especially now that Tony is gone in the MCU. So here's my theory, plain and simple. Iron Man was never just about Tony Stark. It was about setting up the archetype of the futurist, the genius who tries to save the world with his mind. And the MCU has been quietly preparing us for the dark side of that archetype all along. Doom is the inevitable shadow of Stark's legacy. From the cave in Iron Man 1 to the snap in Endgame, every major moment has been planting hints that this story isn't over. And when Doom finally arrives, it won't feel like a new chapter. It'll feel like the continuation of the one that started in 2008. I know that's a bold take, but stay with me. Because in the next part, I'm going to dive deeper into the middle arc of this theory, where we trace more of Tony's MCU journey, connect the dots with Doom's mythology, and even explore some real-world production hints Marvel has dropped that all point toward this exact connection. Trust me, the evidence only gets crazier from here. When I think about how Marvel structured the MCU after Iron Man 1, it almost feels like they were setting up a chessboard where every move Tony Stark made was mirrored by darker reflections. The more I dug into it, the more I started noticing that every phase of the MCU didn't just build Tony up, it also exposed the flaws in his worldview. And if you look at those flaws carefully, they align almost perfectly with the traits that define Dr. Doom. It's like Marvel has been telling us, for every Tony Stark, there's a Doom waiting in the shadows, watching, learning, and waiting for the right time to rise. Let's start with Iron Man 2, because people tend to dismiss that movie as one of the weaker entries, but I think it's actually a critical piece of this puzzle. Tony's big struggle in that movie isn't just fighting Ivan Vanko, it's confronting the consequences of his father's legacy. Vanko's father worked with Howard Stark, and when he was cast aside, his bitterness passed down to his son. What does this show us? That Tony's technology, his family name, his empire, they don't just belong to him. They leave ripples, and those ripples always come back. Doom's entire character is built on generational trauma and the way past sins haunt the present. In a way, Vanko is a warm-up act for Doom, someone who says, "You think you are untouchable because you have power, but your family's choices still matter." That theme of inherited legacies is what makes Doom so dangerous. And then there's Tony's palladium poisoning in Iron Man 2. Remember how the arc reactor that kept him alive was also killing him? That duality of salvation and destruction is pure Doom energy. Doom, in the comics, is constantly in this tug-of-war between brilliance and self-destruction. His inventions save him, but they also trap him in armor. His sorcery elevates him, but it curses him at the same time. When I rewatch Tony struggling with his reactor, I can't help but think Marvel was already embedding this idea. Genius always comes with a cost, and Doom is the character who embraces that cost to the extreme. Fast forward to the Avengers, and we get another crucial connection. Tony is the first one to really grasp the scale of cosmic threats. He's the one who flies a nuke through the portal and sees the Chitauri Armada firsthand. That experience changes him forever. It's not just trauma, it's foresight. He knows what's coming, and how does he respond? By trying to control the uncontrollable. That's exactly what leads him to create Ultron. But let's pause here. Ultron is a Doom story in disguise. Doom, at his core, is about trying to bend fate to his will, to use intellect as a shield against chaos. Tony literally builds a godlike AI to do the same. Ultron, of course, spirals out of control. But the instinct behind it is the same instinct that drives Doom. The fear that if you don't take absolute control, everything falls apart. And what's even crazier is how Age of Ultron introduces the concept of vibranium being stolen from Wakanda. Who was the middleman? Ulysses Klaue. But here's the kicker. Klaue's role is exactly the kind of shady connection Doom would exploit. Doom has a long history in the comics of meddling with Wakanda, coveting vibranium, and trying to control resources others see as sacred. Ultron was just a vehicle, but the breadcrumbs point straight to a Doom-style influence. Technology, resources, unchecked ambition, all clashing in the shadows. Then we hit Civil War, and this is where I think Marvel really cranked up the foreshadowing. Tony becomes the face of regulation, control, and oversight. He believes unchecked power leads to disaster, and he's willing to put heroes under government authority to prevent that. Now, think about Doom. Doom doesn't believe in oversight from others, but he does believe in absolute order under his rule. The philosophical core is the same. Freedom is dangerous. Chaos must be tamed. Tony and Steve's fight isn't just about the Sokovia Accords. It's about two competing visions of the future. Doom represents the extreme version of Tony's vision. Imagine Tony with none of Steve's idealism to counterbalance him. That's Doom. Civil War feels less like a one-off conflict and more like Marvel planting the ideological seeds for Doom's arrival. And I can't ignore one of the most subtle Civil War details: Zemo. On the surface, Zemo is just a grieving Sokovian soldier. But think about what he accomplishes. He manipulates events, plays heroes against each other, and destroys the Avengers without ever lifting a fist. That's exactly how Doom operates. Doom doesn't need to throw punches to win. He uses strategy, intellect, and manipulation. Zemo feels like a rehearsal for Doom's style of villainy. It's Marvel saying, "Here's what happens when brains beat brawn," which is Doom's entire brand. But if Civil War set the ideological stage, Infinity War and Endgame set the cosmic stage. Tony's arc in those movies is one long meditation on control versus inevitability. He knows Thanos is coming. He spends years building defenses, and yet, in the end, he still has to gamble everything on a single desperate act. Doom, in contrast, is the character who never accepts inevitability. In the comics, Doom has fought Mephisto for his mother's soul. He's stolen the power of Beyonders. He's reshaped universes, all because he refuses to believe in limits. If Tony's story ends with him accepting that sacrifice is inevitable, Doom's story begins with him rejecting that very notion. And doesn't it feel poetic that the MCU ended Tony's journey right before they introduced Doom? It's almost like Marvel cleared the board so Doom could rise as the anti-Stark. Now, let's dive into some real-world Marvel clues, because the production side of things is just as revealing. When Marvel announced Phase 4, they leaned heavily into the idea of legacy. Spider-Man wrestling with Tony's absence, Falcon taking on the Captain America mantle, and characters like Riri Williams entering the picture. Riri, in particular, is interesting, because in the comics, she's directly mentored by Tony's AI. But Doom plays a huge role in her story too. In some arcs, he sees her as a rival, someone carrying Stark's flame, and he tries to position himself as the true heir of Stark's genius. So if Marvel is already bringing in Riri, how long before Doom steps in as the dark counterpoint? It feels inevitable. And think about the technology narrative Marvel has been weaving. Stark tech keeps showing up in dangerous hands. In Far From Home, Mysterio weaponizes Edith. In Falcon and the Winter Soldier, the Flag Smashers exploit super soldier serum. In Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, Riri's genius sparks a global conflict over vibranium. This is not random. It's Marvel telling us that in a world without Tony Stark, his inventions and ideas are seeds waiting to be corrupted. Who's the ultimate corruptor? Doom. Now let me throw in one more layer: Latveria. We haven't heard the name in the MCU yet, but the hints are there. WandaVision gave us a fictional Eastern European setting with Westview's aesthetic. Falcon and the Winter Soldier introduced Madripoor as a hidden city of influence and power. Marvel has been sprinkling these fictional nations into the map quietly, almost preparing us for Latveria to drop. And when it does, it won't just be a random country. It'll be the seat of power for the man who has been connected to Tony Stark's legacy from day one. Here's where the speculation really gets juicy. What if Latveria has already been studying Stark tech? What if Doom has quietly been watching, gathering, and preparing? Remember, Tony's suits have been blown up, destroyed, left behind, and his nanotech existed in the world long enough to inspire imitation. Someone, somewhere, had to be cataloging all of that. And who better than Doom? Imagine the reveal. Doom steps onto the screen, not as some unknown dictator, but as the man who has been reverse engineering Stark tech, blending it with mysticism, and using it to create a new kind of power. Suddenly, Doom doesn't just feel like a Fantastic Four villain. He feels like the natural heir to Iron Man's entire narrative. And you know, Marvel loves symmetry. They love to mirror beginnings and endings. If Iron Man 1 started with Stark building armor in a cave to survive, how powerful would it be if Doom enters the MCU having built his empire in secrecy, in the shadows, using the remnants of Stark's innovations? One man built in captivity to free himself. The other builds in freedom to enslave the world. That's cinematic poetry. Another subtle but critical link is Tony's relationship with mysticism. In Infinity War, Tony meets Doctor Strange, and there's that famous moment where Strange says, We're in the endgame now. Tony, the man of pure science, is suddenly aligned with a sorcerer. And it works. Their collaboration feels natural. Why? Because by then, Tony's technology had already crossed into the realm of the mystical. Nanotech, time travel GPS devices, these are indistinguishable from magic. That blurring of science and sorcery is the exact bridge that Doom represents. He's the living embodiment of Tony's tech, colliding with Strange's mysticism. So when Strange returns in future movies, don't be surprised if Doom becomes his Stark-like foil. I know some people will argue, why would Marvel tie Doom to Stark instead of just making him a Reed Richards rival, like in the comics? And my answer is simple. The MCU isn't a one-to-one adaptation. It's about emotional resonance. Most mainstream fans don't have a deep connection to Reed Richards yet, but they do have a decade-long emotional attachment to Tony Stark. So, if you want Doom to hit hard immediately, you tether him to Stark's legacy. You make him the shadow that proves Tony's story never really ended. That's how you create impact. And here's the kicker. If you rewatch Endgame's final scene, where Tony snaps his fingers and says, "I am Iron Man," it's the ultimate moment of individuality, of one man shaping destiny through sheer willpower. Doom, in his own way, lives by that creed. He believes he is the singular will that can shape the future. So imagine the narrative symmetry if Doom's first major appearance echoes Tony's final act. Maybe Doom wields cosmic power, maybe he seizes control of something like Kang's tech, but he does it with the same Iron Man-like declaration of self. It would feel like Tony's legacy coming full circle, from hero to villain, from salvation to domination. So when I connect all these dots, Tony's flaws, his obsession with control, his tech being stolen, his blurred line between science and magic, his ideological clash with Steve, his death leaving a vacuum, all of it screams Doom. Marvel didn't just build Iron Man to launch the MCU. They built Iron Man to pave the road for Doom. And if that's true, then we haven't seen the last of Tony Stark's influence. In fact, the real story of Iron Man might just be beginning. By the time I got to this last stretch of connecting Iron Man to Dr. Doom, I realized the theory isn't just about hidden Easter eggs or Marvel dropping a few winks for hardcore fans. It's about narrative inevitability. From the moment Tony Stark built that first suit in a cave with a box of scraps, Marvel was setting up the archetype of the futurist. And the archetype doesn't end with Tony's death. In fact, his sacrifice almost demands a shadow to rise in response, because stories like this don't leave vacuums unfilled. In myth, every hero creates their opposite. In the MCU, Tony Stark created Doom without even realizing it. Let's rewind for a moment to Tony's final moments in Endgame. That scene is burned into our cultural memory. The gauntlet, the snap, "I am Iron Man." It's the culmination of everything Tony's character stood for. Wit, defiance, self-sacrifice, and the ultimate trust that his genius and bravery could change fate. But it's also a moment of finality. The genius futurist, who always thought 10 steps ahead, couldn't outthink mortality. He had to accept it. And if that's the resolution of Tony's journey, then Doom is the inversion. The genius futurist who refuses to accept fate, who will tear reality apart before surrendering to inevitability. That's why I think Doom's arrival isn't just about introducing a new villain. It's about completing Iron Man's story. So, let's talk speculation, because this is where things get wild. How exactly could Marvel bring Doom in while keeping him tethered to Stark's legacy? One possibility is through Riri Williams' Ironheart. She's already positioned as the next generation of genius inventor, inspired directly by Stark. In the comics, Doom and Riri have this interesting relationship where Doom tries to play the role of mentor and manipulator, almost like he sees himself as the only one worthy of carrying Stark's flame. Imagine that dynamic on screen. Riri, the bright-eyed new hero, and Doom, the corrupted reflection of Stark's genius, circling each other. It would be the perfect way to bring Iron Man's influence back into the story without resurrecting Tony himself. Another possibility lies in the multiverse. Marvel has been leaning into alternate realities with Loki, No Way Home, Multiverse of Madness, and Kang. And in the multiverse, every archetype repeats itself with variations. What if Doom emerges not just as Latveria's ruler, but as a man who studied the legend of Tony Stark across universes? What if he sees Stark not as a rival, but as a template? Proof that one man's genius can change everything. That would make Doom's obsession with control even scarier, because he wouldn't just be a dictator, he'd be a man who consciously decided to become the darker version of Iron Man. And here's where I think Marvel might get sneaky with their storytelling. Remember how Thanos was teased for years before we ever saw him fully in action? Little post-credit scenes, shadows, mentions. I think they'll do the same with Doom. Maybe a hint of Latveria in a news broadcast. Maybe a stolen cache of Stark tech turning up on the black market. Maybe even an AI fragment of Tony's work falling into the wrong hands. Each of these breadcrumbs would build suspense until Doom finally steps onto the stage. And when he does, the impact will be massive, because he won't feel like a random new character. He'll feel like someone we've been waiting for since Iron Man 1. Now, I want to zoom in on one detail that keeps nagging at me: Stark Tower. In Spider-Man: Homecoming, the tower gets sold, and the identity of the buyer is left deliberately vague. Fans speculated it was Oscorp. Others thought it might be the Baxter Building for the Fantastic Four. But what if the buyer wasn't either of those? What if it was Doom? Imagine the poetic symmetry of that. The tower that symbolized Tony Stark's genius and became the Avengers' first headquarters is quietly purchased by the man who will corrupt that legacy. It's the kind of narrative twist Marvel loves. Take something iconic and flip it into something threatening. If they play it this way, Stark Tower could literally become Doom's headquarters. A visual metaphor for Stark's shadow looming over the MCU. And don't forget about the Sokovia connection. Sokovia was destroyed in Age of Ultron, and it left behind a power vacuum in Eastern Europe. What if that vacuum is exactly where Latveria rises? It wouldn't take much for Marvel to tweak geography and say Latveria grew out of Sokovia's ashes. That would immediately tie Doom's rise to Tony Stark's failures, because Ultron was Tony's creation. Imagine Doom standing before the world, declaring that he rose from the ruins of Sokovia to restore order where Stark and the Avengers failed. That's the kind of personal sting that would make his rivalry with Stark's legacy unforgettable. And speaking of Ultron, let's not ignore the possibility that fragments of Ultron are still out there. We know in What If, Ultron became an almost unstoppable multiversal force. If any piece of that AI survived in the main MCU timeline, who would be smart enough to find it, harness it, and control it? Doom. And doesn't it feel like destiny for the man who mirrors Stark to pick up the pieces of Tony's greatest failure? Ultron, perfected under Doom's control, would be a terrifying fusion of Stark's mistakes and Doom's ambition. Now, let me add in another layer: Doctor Strange. Strange and Tony had that natural chemistry, like two geniuses from different disciplines recognizing each other. But Strange never really got a rival in the same intellectual sense. Mordo? Sure, but that's more about ideology than brilliance. Doom, though, is different. Doom is both scientist and sorcerer. He can challenge Strange in magic while also matching Tony's scientific mind. That makes him the perfect bridge villain. Someone who can stand toe-to-toe with both the Avengers' legacy and the mystical side of the MCU. And the beauty of it is, Strange already represents the idea that science and magic blur together. He told Tony in Infinity War that there was only one way to win. Doom is the guy who would say, "No, there are infinite ways, and I will force the universe to obey mine." And this brings me back to why I think Iron Man's fingerprints are all over Doom's eventual story. Tony represented the best-case scenario of what happens when genius meets power. A flawed but ultimately selfless hero who learned humility. Doom represents the worst-case scenario. A man who never learns humility, who believes his genius entitles him to reshape the world. That's the lesson Marvel has been teaching us for a decade. And when Doom finally arrives, he won't feel like just another villain. He'll feel like Tony's ghost. The road Tony could have taken if he had never grown, never sacrificed, never learned to care about more than himself. Now, let me go even bolder. What if Marvel uses Doom as a way to bring Tony back into the story, not physically, but thematically? Picture this. Doom gains access to Stark's AI archives. He reconstructs fragments of Tony's mind, maybe even uses them as tools or advisors, but twists them into serving his purposes. Suddenly, Stark is present again, but as a haunting echo manipulated by Doom. That would not only be chilling, it would also make every hero who loved Tony face the reality that his legacy is being corrupted in real time. The emotional weight of that would be incredible. And you know Marvel won't waste the chance to bring Robert Downey Jr. back in some capacity, even if it's not as a resurrected Tony. A voice cameo, an AI projection, a corrupted hologram. That's all it would take to remind audiences of the connection. And tying that cameo to Doom's rise would cement the idea that Iron Man's story isn't over. It's just evolving. I also can't shake the idea that Marvel has been sneaking Doom-adjacent imagery into the MCU already. Remember in Black Panther, when Shuri mocks Everett Ross for being a broken white man she has to fix? The whole movie is about outsiders coveting Wakanda's resources. That's literally one of Doom's recurring comic arcs. In Multiverse of Madness, we see a glimpse of incursions and universes collapsing. Doom is central to those kinds of stories in the comics. It's almost like Marvel is peppering the ground with Doom-shaped breadcrumbs without saying his name yet. And if Kang really is the big bad of the multiverse saga, then Doom feels like the natural successor. Kang is about inevitability, about the timelines being written. Doom is about defiance, about reshaping reality itself. So when the Kang dynasty concludes, Doom will step in, not just as the next villain, but as the answer to Kang's philosophy. And here's the kicker. Doom's arrival will also feel like the answer to Tony Stark's death. Because in a universe where Iron Man is gone, the only thing scarier than Thanos or Kang is someone who embodies everything Tony could have become if he let his darker impulses win. So let me tie this all together. From Iron Man 1's cave to Endgame's snap, the MCU has been preparing us for Doom. The 10 rings symbolized hidden power structures. Obadiah Stane showed us Stark's tech could be corrupted. Vanko and Whiplash introduced the theme of legacies and sins of the father. Ultron showed us what happens when control becomes obsession. Civil War revealed Tony's authoritarian leanings. Infinity War and Endgame showed us the limits of genius and the acceptance of sacrifice. And now, with Tony gone, his absence is the perfect stage for Doom to step forward. Every phase has been building this. It's not random. It's deliberate. When Doom finally arrives, he won't just be the Fantastic Four's enemy. He'll be Iron Man's shadow, Stark's ghost, the darker mirror of the futurist archetype Marvel has been teaching us to care about since 2008. And that's why I believe the hints have been hiding in plain sight all along. Iron Man is connected to Dr. Doom in ways that are deeper than just Easter eggs. It's narrative DNA. And if I'm right, when we finally see Doom in the MCU, it won't just feel like the start of a new villain. It'll feel like the continuation of the story we've been following since the very beginning. The story of a man in a suit of armor, trying to save the world with his mind, whether the world wants it or not. If you stuck with me all the way through this breakdown, thank you. I know this was a massive theory, and it might sound crazy at first, but the more I connect the dots, the more inevitable it feels. Iron Man and Dr. Doom are two sides of the same coin, and Marvel has been flipping that coin since day one. And hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with your fellow Marvel fans, and subscribe for more insane theory breakdowns like this one. Because trust me, the hints are only going to get crazier as we move deeper into the multiverse saga. And I'll be here connecting the dots, one wild theory at a time.